I was an intern here in the mid-'80s, and it had already happened.
Yeah. And I remember people would tell me, like, the old alliances from that, that's a Chronicle person. There were
You can't really hear you guys in Idaho.
All right, I'll...
Speak up.
Anyway,
she's
so
moving up
when
to the table.
I was saying when I came here, the merger had just happened, and there were still really fresh and raw feelings about that. And it wasn't the staffers battled each other after that, but there were still very raw emotions. And I remember as a newcomer thinking, get over it. And then, so I thought of that when I read the first report a week ago, and about the River Park Square, and I just felt very sad the next day. For all day I couldn't shake it, and I couldn't figure out where that was coming from. And I think part of it for me was I lived through that, and the report reduced 10 years of my life, and I was involved through the editorial board, but not directly involved in the coverage, but it just kind of reduced 10 years of my experience into this seemingly very black and white judgment of the journalism that went on for River Park Square. And kind of I felt, no, I didn't feel that. But so I think my sadness too was how these issues become so black and white. And there was a lot of nuance. And what else was I going to say? And I just think that that's part of the problem with stuff like that, is it reduces everything to this was good, this was bad, now it's good, or now it's bad. And really the journalism in that 10 years was both great and fell really short. And I'm sure in this 10 years when I look back on it, the ones we're living now, we're going to see a lot of great journalism and some journalism we regret. And I think that the report for me didn't, and it can't, it's the nature of the beast. It didn't take into consideration the nuance of what happens in newsrooms. And so it just felt sad that happened, that it got reduced to those. And then the two columns on Sunday with Steve and Chris seemed to again be that black and white, either or, this is what happened, and it's more complicated than that. So I felt frustrated a little bit and discouraged about how the nuance of who we are as journalists and human beings, and who our editors are. Steve and Chris have very different styles, but and effective leaders. It all got lost in this very black and white report. So that's what I wanted to say.
Anybody else?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Oh, just a kind of an open forum on the audit, and thoughts that people have about the audit last week, columns that ran this Sunday.
I'm just curious as to, I think you make good points about in hiring somebody outside in a full-time capacity to cover the Coles family. And I think you make some good points about does that justify a full-time fee? And secondly, if we're paying them, would it even be perceived as an outside reporter? But I'm just wondering how much thought went into that? Was there, were you down to talking names? Were you down to talking structures? Were you down to, did it even get to that point, or was it?
I don't think it got all that deep because the concept sort of failed on its face for a couple of reasons. One is just the news value. Is it justified when there are so many things going on? Every once in a while, the Coles interests will pop up to the top of the news agenda, but so often there are other interests that it would be great if we could devote full-time attention to, but we don't, because we make those kinds of choices. I really wish we had somebody to do more on Marshall Chesron. I wish we had somebody to do more on Spokane River. You just have to make priority calls. The other is that perceptual issue, and I think the lesson there actually grows out of the Seattle experience. Bill Richards, who did the field work for this audit, was the independent reporter hired by Frank Blethen and Mike Fancher at the Times to cover their JOA controversy and bring independence to it. But the minute he got independent, Blethen fired him. When he got too close and started writing too much about the company's financial situation, he was called in and told that his contract was revoked. And at no time do I think Seattle Times actually accrued any benefit from having Richards doing this work, because it was always understood that he was getting his paycheck from the company, and he was always writing at the pleasure of Frank Blethyn. So I'm just not sure that between the expense and the priority issue that it was really a starter as an idea. My compromise was to fall back on the thought that occasionally, when a story really elevates, that we might bring somebody from the outside in to kind of edit it, monitor it, and speak to it. And it's not fair exactly to go back and say we would have done it under this circumstance or that, but in retrospect I'm thinking that the garage death might have justified something like that. There may come a time when the housing developments out in the valley justify that, or something dealing with the river and Inland Empire paper might justify that. And that was my compromise.
This is maybe just a sliver of it, and I realize these are thoughts and discussions that occur throughout the sixth floor, if anywhere. But I've noticed there seems to be a particular glee in whether it's the Journal of Business or the Spokesman-Review that gets to break news of some new development by Centennial Properties. And it just seems one of the things that could be done is that there is an independent news, independent of the Coles family, news outlet, and those things, since it's a development and it's an announcement, couldn't that just be done with like a blanket news release that goes to, rather than giving one outlet a news release before everyone else? Couldn't you make sure that everybody, including the independent of the Coles families, received that?
You know more about how that works than I do, Eddie.
I would love it if that were the case, but in the past, Jennifer West has sort of doled these things out as she sees fit, and so I think that that would be very much preferable. Just have them do it like essentially everybody else does, and just put out a blanket press release saying we're announcing this huge project. Let everybody do with it what they will.
How often were we the beneficiary of her largesse? Yeah.
Well, but even if we were, I don't think we've got people subscribing to our paper because they got news of a Centennial Properties development before the Inlander did, or anything like that. So it's,
no, they tend to give that stuff to the Journal of Business, which truly does bring a certain amount of glee to that kind of an announcement.
Over what? I mean, the standard professional PR operation shops for their news outlet because they feel they can get the best spin by giving it a particular thing. And whether that's what's done in this particular case or not, I think it feeds or perpetuates that. Anyway, those go beyond newsroom issues, but I just think that impacts.
Yeah. One of the things, though, that I think has to come out of all of this, I would not pick up the phone. I wouldn't want Addie or Allison, now as business editor, to pick up the phone and call Jennifer West and suggest to her any approach on how she handles that. I wouldn't mention it to Betsy in the elevator, and I wouldn't ask Stacy to do it in our weekly meetings. I think one of the things now is, I've tried not to have that kind of ex parte contact, and now it's even more important to not have that ex parte contact. They will decide what they're going to do on the basis of their own decisions, just like Marshall Cheseron's Flax will decide what they're going to do. And I'm not going to lobby one way or the other. It's because it's just not appropriate. And I think that standard is one of the core issues raised and dealt with in this audit. That they make their own calls.
I was interested to hear you say this morning that the audit, the aim of the audit was to bring some, closure, for lack of a better word, in the newsroom to this, because I came away after reading it last Sunday that this isn't going to change. People who hate the Coles and think the worst of us and our journalism, this isn't going to change their minds. They're going to think that we spun it or we, had some influence over it. So, my first reading of it is, why do we do this? Because it's not going to change people's minds who have had decades and decades of hating us. Yes, I liked it for that very reason that we had not had a closure in the newsroom about this, and I thought he pretty much nailed our failings. He also fleshed out the efforts, and sometimes some extraordinary efforts by reporters here to try to get the stories in the paper, including the documents that we had but couldn't use and were told that we couldn't report on. So it wasn't a completely, there was some nuance in there because the reporting staff was trying to do its job, and they were being sat on by editors.
Yeah, that's
And at least, somebody had nothing to do with any of the stories, but hearing these controversies in the newsroom for years, I think it's great. It sets the record. Things that told us where we were and it's great to hear our readers service by studying that story for many years and in opening ourselves up to accusations of favoritism.
I don't think the intent of the audit was ever to try to persuade or convince our most diehard critics of anything. That's a no-win game. They've come to their judgment, and there's nothing that we will do that will ever change their mind. But I think putting it all on the record and addressing what Karen was saying, I think that was one of the real benefits of it in the whole.
Yeah. You can see how this happened. I saw how it happened. I was there, but at some point, the story became something that could not be handled the regular way. And someone should have said, "Oh, wait a minute, we have to reevaluate this." After all, at that time, the editor had a lot more resources to deal with this problem than we would now do it. And he should have backed away, and the editors in charge at the time should have said, "Wait, we can't deal with this story the way we've always dealt with it. It's become bigger, it's become political," and well, that never happened. And so all of us who were there and went through that at the time, we all suffered embarrassment and felt compromised by the actions of our leaders, and that legacy sort of exists today as a result. And I don't know what to say, but finally someone's come out and said, "This is what happened," and this is what happened not only to journalism, but the people involved in it. This is how they were affected by it too. So.
I should reiterate in answer to part of what Addie said, what I said when I told you all that we were going to do this. As Gary says, I never thought that this would have much external value. What happens outside of here happens outside of here. I thought it would bring some closure to the newsroom, in a sense. I thought it would be a chance for our reporters to step up and explain themselves in a way that they've not been allowed to do in the past. And in that sense, I think that people like Camden and Allison come through loud and clear and have, for the first time, the ability to explain things that happened to them and that they were involved in. I think that's important. I thought getting Stacy on the record in public that the editor has total and absolute independence in covering the family business was important, and that's part of this process. And then I just think it's necessary to understand your history. It was never intended to divide the room or to cause a crisis of loyalty. It was certainly not my frame on any of this. And I tried to depersonalize it as much as possible. Nothing that I wrote about it, nothing that I ever said, represented me speaking for Chris or even naming Chris. It was most important function of this audit, I thought, was internal. And then also to give us some ethical standards that can apply to the revise of our code of ethics that will benefit those who follow us, for as long as Stacy is publisher of the paper.
I don't really think for the ongoing coverage of the Coles family and their other enterprises, whether it's real estate or paper mail. But we really need outside reporters, as long as we have it very clear that we're going to cover them like everybody else. I mean, River Park Square was a real anomaly, and it was the first public-private partnership that the family has ever entered into, maybe the last. Who knows? But I mean, it was its own animal. But everything else, as long as we know that we can cover them as aggressively as anybody else, I don't see why we need a special reporter.
One of the things I remember from the credibility roundtable, and can't quote her exactly, but I think the strongest point that Joanne Bird made in that was not that you need to have farm your coverage of the business out to anybody on an ongoing basis, but it's just that you need to be absolutely critically, immediately aware that every covering your own ownership, you've got a situation that needs to be dealt with, and you need to be upfront with your readers about it. You need to be upfront internally about it, and have an awareness of all the challenges that poses. Be ready to deal with it. There was never any suggestion that the newspaper is not capable of dealing with that situation. It's just not any awareness.
Well, I think that.
I was just glad to hear what Harry and Kevin said, because to me it mostly just felt anticlimactic. Like most of what was in there, I guess I already knew. A couple of things I didn't know whether I knew them or didn't know them or forgot them. But
welcome to our age.
Some people felt like it was. I thought, well, maybe they'll find stuff I hadn't heard before. I did feel like reading Jim's series from a few years ago, and then other coverage of the controversy that I knew most of it. I knew, but maybe it hadn't all been put together in that way.
I think one of the more interesting facets of this, I don't know what would have happened, but there were no smoking guns to confirm the worst assertions of interference on the part of the harshest critics, the Shook and Connors. And it's not that Bill Richards didn't try to find them, because he really did. The guy is a great reporter, and his interview with me and the other people I talked to said it's one of the toughest interviews I've ever had. He didn't find them. And so what we do see is, in large part, what we've already seen and reported, the Nordstrom lease, the Cooper's Librand report. There's nothing new in any of that. So one of the headlines is a non-headline. There was nothing new that Richards was able to uncover, which is good for us and good for the Coles family. Not sure what it means for our credibility, but
one of the real pluses I see in it, and I said this in the managers meeting last week, is the report did illustrate what happens when you make too many assumptions about what your editor or publisher is wanting or thinking. And even Stacy said, "Oh, I wouldn't have minded." I can't remember it. It wouldn't have bothered me. And I think that's part of every newsroom I've been in, of that idea of, well, I won't even try this because it won't get approved, or it pushes a boundary, or just checking out things with editors who you think are going to mind something. And I see it not only as presenting ethical possibilities of challenges like River Park Square, but also being a stopper to creativity. You think, oh, well, my editor's never going to approve that, or Steve won't like it, or Gary will hate it. And I think, if anything, the report really brought out that when you act on assumptions about a reaction, it really has a chilling effect. And what's the worst that can happen if you ask something? We're not going to get fired over saying, can we do this? So that was a real positive from the report. And the other thing is, I think anytime a story with the family business comes up and there's any attempt to not report it aggressively, we can just say, remember River Park Square. Remember the Alamo.
Yes. Anything else on RPS? Anything there from the phones?
Apparently not from Idaho.
I'm curious how the Chris Peck opinion piece came about.
Well, I never talked to Chris. It came through Stacy. Chris, back up. When the audit came in, Having read it and knowing that Chris participated in the interview, I mean, he really had a chance to respond to most of the specifics. I thought at that point that it was less likely that he would want to respond in column form. Apparently, having read the original report a week ago, he decided he did want to respond, and he let Stacy know. He tried, I think, to let me know too, but the emails got buried somewhere, so I never got them from Chris. I got everything from Stacy, and he sent in a draft column, I think, on Wednesday or Thursday, and then he sent in a revised late Friday afternoon, and considerably toned down. I mean, the first version. You saw the draft? Yeah, it turns out the draft had wide circulation in the room. I had several people ask me about it. I'm not sure how it got into the room, but it did, and so the second version is somewhat toned down. My view, Stacy was concerned about running it and asked Chris not to run it. Chris said he wanted to, and my view was that there was no way I was not going to run Chris's column. And so until Chris said he didn't want it to run, it was going to run, and so that's how it worked out. And without comment, I didn't, and still, really not responding to it, just letting it speak for itself, which I've tried to let Chris do in this whole process.
After I read Stacy's column last Sunday, Steve and I happened to be in here in the office that afternoon, and I said, Chris is going to respond. I don't think there's an editor in the country who wouldn't have responded after he read what the publisher had written. Just human nature.
Do you think he slept on that?
I'm sorry?
Do you think that was kind of one of those decisions he slept on? I mean, you know what they say, sleep on it?
Who, Chris?
Sleep on, yeah.
Oh, yeah, because the column, actually, he didn't submit it until...
I think it came in Wednesday.
Midweek.
Yeah,
so,
first draft.
I think he did.
But again, it came in through Stacy, and Stacy was out of town all week, so I've not had any chance to talk to Stacy about it, really.
It didn't really go to the most damning things that Stacy said in the column.
No, it didn't.
No, it's I don't know. I just let it go.
Have we had reaction at all by phone or anything up here to that package?
Probably. I posted. There's 5 or 6 comments on News as a Conversation, all from the usual suspects. I've got about 10 emails. About half of them from the usual suspects. I said Eric Skaggs just sent one in, David Bray, Dave Laird, and then some from names I don't recognize, all supportive of the audit and pleased that we did it. That's about it. A couple of voicemails, one obscene, and anonymous. Yeah, I think the people who think that this conversation is pretty much old history in the community are absolutely right. I don't think there's a lot of community interest here. Never thought there was, which is why we didn't play it all over page 1. It's still much more, I think, an internal issue than an external one.
My concern with Chris's column was that outside this building, outside this organization, people who have misgivings are going to read that as a defense of everything that was done through that period of time, and the newspaper or the institution getting the last word once again after the independence. So, it could be unfounded, but that's kind of what I'm saying.
Well, my sense is that the column wasn't written for us, and it wasn't written for the community. It was written for Romanesco, and
Was it there?
I haven't seen it posted yet, but it will be before the day is out. Yeah.
Has there been any trade press?
Very little. All positive, what there has been, but very little. Again, I think from the national perspective, it's too much a local issue. And while the audit itself is in many ways unprecedented, I just don't think that outside of Spokane there's a whole lot of interest in River Park Square.
There was a, Seattle Times did a straight news story on it, and there was some interesting stuff both on Postman's site and just in their comments.
I didn't know Postman took it on.
Yeah, where the readers were basically saying, hey, what about the Seattle Times and Lethan, repeal of the so-called death tax and all of that, you guys have your own problems to worry about, and so that nobody said anything but us.
No, I wouldn't expect that. Well, I actually, somebody was asking me why it didn't get more national media attention. And I think there are two reasons. One is the appropriately enormous amount of respect that Chris has in the industry, and I just don't think there were a whole lot of folks who wanted to go down that path. And second, the antipathy towards news councils and to outside review. And I don't think the industry wants to spend a lot of time paying attention to this because they don't want to get into this ballgame. They don't want outsiders coming in to review their journalism. There's nothing secret about that.
Well, and I would add a third. Let's face it, River Park Square has never been a very sexy story.
Oh.
It's deeply complicated, and for many people outside our community, it would have so very little interest as a story.
Yeah.
And it's one of the trouble with the whole legal, lawyers, you can say corruption, but to prove corruption when the city council has signed off on something.
It's really hard to do.
You just aren't going to be able to do it.
Well, anyway, that's RPS. Anybody want to talk about Muggate?
Is that the brother to Jacket?
I guess I didn't realize. I mean, I had kept my mouth closed, but I'm glad apparently others hadn't.